The microphone slipped from Steve Harvey's hand, hitting the studio floor with a metallic echo that seemed to silence even the heartbeat of every person in that room. For 30 years of hosting, Steve had never lost his composure like this, but the words he just heard from the 73-year-old man standing at the Family Feud podium weren't just an answer to a survey question. They were a confession that shattered every wall between entertainment and raw human truth. James Mitchell stood at the podium in a worn but clean navy sweater, his weathered hands gripping the buzzer with the kind of strength that comes from decades of carrying burdens others couldn't imagine. Behind him, his family cheered for their latest correct answer, but James wasn't celebrating. His eyes were fixed on something beyond the cameras, beyond the lights, beyond the game itself. The question had been simple enough. Name something a parent never stops doing. James had answered without hesitation. Protecting their child. The survey board revealed it as the #1 answer, worth 38 points. The studio audience erupted in applause. His family hugged and high-fived behind him, but James didn't move. He didn't smile. He just stood there, holding that buzzer like it was the last solid thing in his world. Steve noticed first. After decades of reading contestants, he could spot when someone was fighting an internal battle. He walked over to James with his usual confident stride, ready to share in the celebration, but something in the older man's posture made him slow down. "Mr. Mitchell," Steve said, his voice gentle but carrying clearly through his wireless microphone. "That was a beautiful answer, protecting their child. Tell me about that." James looked up at Steve, and that's when everyone in the studio saw it. Behind those tired eyes was a story that had been carried in silence for so long that finally speaking it felt like both relief and devastation. "I have a son," James said quietly, his voice barely audible but picked up clearly by the studio microphones. "Michael. He's 45 years old, and he has Down syndrome." The audience settled into respectful quiet. Steve nodded encouragingly, sensing there was more. "His mother." James paused, swallowing hard. "She left when Michael was 6 months old. Said she couldn't handle it. Said it wasn't the life she signed up for." His voice cracked slightly. "So it's been just me and Michael for 45. Steve felt something shift in the studio atmosphere. This wasn't just a contestant sharing a personal detail. This was a man who had spent nearly half a century as the sole guardian of someone who would never be independent, never be able to care for himself, never stop needing protection. 45 years, Steve repeated softly, and something in his tone made the entire studio lean forward. "James, that's a lifetime of love right there." James nodded, but his composure was beginning to crack. "He's my everything," he whispered. "Every morning for 45 years, I wake up, and my first thought is, what does Michael need today? Every decision I've ever made, every job I've taken, every place we've lived, it's all been about what's best for Michael." Behind the cameras, producers were quietly signaling to keep rolling. This was no longer about the game. This was about something much deeper. "But I'm 73 now," James continued. And now the tears he'd been holding back for who knows how long began to fall. "And every night, I lie awake thinking, what happens to Michael when I'm gone? Who's going to protect him then?" The studio fell completely silent. Even the crew members had stopped moving. Steve Harvey, the man who had built a career on quick wit and perfect timing, found himself without words. "I don't have anyone else," James said, his voice breaking completely now. "No other family, no plan. I've spent so much of my life and my money taking care of Michael that I never prepared for what happens after me. And that terrifies me more than anything I've ever faced." Steve looked at this man, this father who had given everything for 45 years, and made a decision that defied every rule of television production. He set down his cards, walked around the podium, and stood directly in front of James Mitchell. "James," Steve said, his voice now stripped of all performance, all entertainment value. Where is Michael now? He's here, James said, pointing to the audience. Front row, with my neighbor who helps sometimes. He loves game shows. This is like Christmas morning for him. Steve turned toward the audience, and there in the front row was Michael Mitchell, a man in his 40s with the unmistakable features of Down syndrome, wearing a bright blue shirt and the biggest smile in the entire studio. When he saw Steve looking at him, Michael waved enthusiastically with both hands. "Michael," Steve called out, "can you come up here, son?" Michael's eyes went wide with excitement. With help from his neighbor, he made his way onto the stage. The moment he reached his father, he wrapped James in the kind of pure, unconditional hug that only someone who has never learned to hide their love can give. "Hi, Mr. Steve," Michael said clearly, beaming up at the host. "This is the best day ever." Steve knelt down slightly to be at Michael's eye level. "Michael, your daddy has been taking care of you for a long time, hasn't he?" 45 years, Michael announced proudly. "Daddy's the best. Daddy in the whole world. He makes me pancakes every Sunday, and he reads me stories, and he never gets mad when I forget things." Steve looked up at James, who was now crying openly. "James," he said, standing back up, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. You've spent 45 years worrying about protecting Michael, but you know what I see when I look at your son." James shook his head, unable to speak. "I see someone who is pure love," Steve said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "I see someone who brings joy everywhere he goes. And you know what else I see? I see that you didn't just protect Michael for 40, you protected the world's access to that love, that joy, that pure heart. You gave us all a gift." Michael was still hugging his father, completely unaware of the emotional storm happening around him, just happy to be on stage with his dad and Steve Harvey. Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his personal business card. But this time, he also pulled out his phone. "I'm going to do something I've never done on this show," Steve announced to the studio. "I'm going to make some phone calls right now, on live television, because Michael and James deserve better than worry." And with the cameras rolling, Steve Harvey called his foundation's director of family services. "Karen, it's Steve. I'm on set right now with a father and son who need our help." For the next 5 minutes, while the studio watched in complete silence, Steve arranged for Michael to be enrolled in a comprehensive care program that would ensure his safety and happiness for the rest of his life, regardless of what happened to James. When he hung up, Steve turned to both men. "Michael is going to be taken care of, James. Always. You can stop worrying now." James collapsed into a chair someone had brought onto the stage, overcome with relief he hadn't felt in decades. "How can I ever thank you?" he whispered. Steve removed his suit jacket and gently placed it around James's shoulders. "You already did," he said. 45 years ago, when you chose love over fear, when you chose to stay when others left, when you chose to protect instead of abandon. That's how you thanked the world." The studio erupted in applause, but it wasn't game show applause. It was the sound of 300 people recognizing something sacred, something that transcended entertainment and touched the deepest part of what it means to be human. Michael, still beaming, looked up at Steve. "Can I hug you too, Mr. Steve?" Steve opened his arms wide, and Michael's hug was everything pure and good about love itself. The game never resumed that day. It didn't need to. Everyone in that studio had already witnessed the most important victory possible. The victory of a love that endures, protects, and never gives up, even when the world says it's too hard, too long, too much. James Mitchell had spent 45 years protecting his son, but in that moment, his son protected him right back, showing the world that love doesn't count cost, doesn't measure time, and never, ever stops believing in tomorrow. As the cameras continued rolling, something unprecedented happened. The competing family, The Rodriguez family from California left their podium and walked across the stage. Maria Rodriguez, a mother of 3, approached Michael with tears in her eyes. "Michael," she said softly, "you are so lucky to have the best daddy in the world." Michael's face lit up even brighter. "I know, he's my hero," he announced proudly, causing another wave of emotion to wash over the studio. Steve watched this interaction and felt something he'd never experienced in decades of television. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a masterclass in what human love looks like when it's tested by time, challenged by circumstance, and proven unbreakable by everything life can throw at it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve announced to the studio and the cameras, "I want everyone to understand what we just witnessed." James Mitchell didn't just answer a survey question. He showed us what unconditional love looks like. He showed us that being a parent isn't about biology. It's about showing up every single day for 45 years. The audience rose to their feet spontaneously. But this time, it wasn't applause for a game show moment. It was applause for a life lived in service to love. James, still wearing Steve's jacket, stood up slowly. Michael immediately took his father's hand, their connection as natural and necessary as breathing. "Mr. Steve," James said, his voice stronger now, "you've given me something I haven't had in years. Peace. For the first time since Michael was born. I'm not afraid of tomorrow." Steve nodded, understanding the weight of those words. "James, I want you to know something. What you've done, raising Michael with such love, such dedication, such pure heart, that's not just parenting. That's a ministry. You've been ministering to an angel for 45 years. And now it's time for the world to minister back to you." Michael, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up with the clarity that sometimes comes from hearts unencumbered by pretense. "Daddy cries sometimes when he thinks I'm sleeping," Michael said matter-of-factly. "But I tell him not to worry, because I love him forever and ever, even after we go to heaven." The studio fell silent again. But this time, it was the silence of awe. Out of the mouths of those society might consider simple, often comes the most profound wisdom. Steve knelt down one more time to look Michael directly in the eyes. "Michael, your daddy doesn't have to cry anymore. Okay? Because now you have a whole family looking out for both of you." "A whole family?" Michael asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "Every person in this studio, everyone watching at home, everyone who hears your story, we're all part of your family now," Steve explained. "And families take care of each other." The episode that aired 3 months later became the highest-rated Family Feud episode in the show's history. Not because of the game, but because of what happened when the game stopped mattering. Viewers didn't just watch, they responded. Donations poured into Steve's foundation specifically earmarked for Michael's care program. Letters arrived from around the world sharing similar stories of families caring for disabled loved ones. But perhaps most importantly, James Mitchell finally slept through the night for the first time in 45 years, knowing that love had triumphed over fear, that community had conquered isolation, and that his son Michael would be safe, cherished, and protected long after James's own earthly protection was no longer needed. The suit jacket Steve gave James that day still hangs in their small apartment, a reminder that sometimes, when you think you're completely alone in carrying an impossible load, the world shows up to help you carry it.